Next week on the Twilight Zone, we let you in on an extravagant practical joke. A man who wants to convey an illusion that the world is coming to an end.
Do you remember when television didn't guide you step by step? When a 30-minute show could mess with your mind, make you think about right and wrong, and still scare you, all in black and white? From 1959 to 1964 on CBS, The Twilight Zone was more than just a TV show. It was like a weekly trust fall led by Rod Serling. The show took science fiction, fantasy, and horror and used them to talk about fear, prejudice, greed, and human nature long before TV was allowed to do that. Some episodes shocked you, some made you feel uneasy, and some didn't really hit until years later when you realized they were about you. Today, we're going to share 15 strange facts about the Twilight Zone, from behind-the-scenes accidents that shaped the show to creative risks that almost got it canceled, to tiny details that changed pop culture forever. And believe us, you won't believe what happens at number 15. So if you love classic TV, late-night reruns, and stories that still hit way too close to home, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let's step into another dimension. Number 1. The script that almost stayed in a drawer. A TV network nearly stopped The Twilight Zone before it even started. In 1957, Rod Serling wrote a script called The Time Element. It had all the things we now think of as The Twilight Zone: time travel, creeping dead, and a twist that gets into your mind and won't let go. The story was about a man who goes to a psychiatrist because he keeps having the same nightmare. In his dream, he is in Honolulu on December 6, 1941, the day before Pearl Harbor.
How could it be 1941? It's 1958. How could it be 1941? It's 1958. 1958.
Every night, the dream lasts longer, and the man starts to believe that it isn't a dream at all. He is actually traveling back in time, and he is going to die there. CBS executives read the script and they hated it. They thought it was too dark, too confusing, and too strange for TV audiences. So they did the polite executive thing. They bought the script, paid Rod Serling, and then shoved it into a drawer. A year later, producer Burt Granite was searching through CBS's pile of unused scripts for material for Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse. That's when he found Serling's forgotten script. Desi Arnaz, yes, that Desi Arnaz, saw something special. He ignored the network's doubts and aired The Time Element on November 24, 1958. Back then, networks measured success by letters. After it aired, the CBS mailroom was buried under thousands of letters. Viewers didn't just say they liked it, they said it haunted them. They loved the exact twist that executives thought audiences were too dumb to understand. CBS suddenly realized they had made a huge mistake. The same network that didn't trust viewers was now staring at a hit hidden under a mountain of stamped envelopes.
Mr. Jensen?
Pete.
Pete? Are you all right?
Oh, sure, I'm all right. Why?
Well, this morning you seemed so sure it was another year.
They called Rod Serling, gave him the green light, and the Twilight Zone was born. One script, one forgotten drawer, and an audience that refused to be underestimated. Number 2. The show existed because the censors were idiots. Before The Twilight Zone, Rod Serling was already famous. He had won Emmys and received a lot of praise. He was writing powerful dramas about racism, war, and injustice, and audiences loved them. But you know who didn't love it? The sponsors.
Who's the culprit? Is it the network, the sponsor? It sure is not the FCC.
No, it's certainly not the FCC, ideally speaking, of course. It's a combination of culprits in this case, Mike. It's partly network, it's principally agency and sponsor. In many ways, I think it's the audience themselves.
In the 1950s, cigarette companies and appliance manufacturers that paid for ad time had a lot of control over what appeared on TV, and they hated anything controversial. If a Serling script made anyone uncomfortable, especially customers in certain parts of the country, the sponsor would force changes and remove parts of it. Serling reached his breaking point when he wrote a teleplay inspired by the real-life murder of Emmett Till.
Which was a story which purported to tell what was the aftermath of the alleged kidnapping in Mississippi of the Till boy, the young Chicago Negro. And I wrote the script using black and white.
By the time the network and sponsors were done with it, the victim wasn't black, the setting wasn't the South, and the word lynching had been removed completely. What started as a powerful story against racial violence became weak and meaningless. That's when Serling realized something. If he set his stories on distant planets, made the villain a robot, or turned prejudice into a supernatural curse, the censors suddenly didn't pay attention. As Serling said, a Martian can say things that a Republican or a Democrat can't. Aliens and monsters became his disguise. The network executives thought they were approving harmless sci-fi, but Serling was secretly including sharp critiques of McCarthyism, racism, nuclear fears, and everything else they had tried to stop him from talking about. The irony was that the people trying to censor him actually made him more powerful. Without those clueless 1950s censors, the Twilight Zone might never have existed. We'd probably just remember Rod Serling as the guy who wrote a few forgotten stage plays.
Next week on The Twilight Zone, Jack Warden, John Daner, and Jean Marsh appear in a bizarre tale of a man and a woman. I don't understand it either. Thank you and good night.
Censorship didn't stop Rod Serling. It gave him a cloaking device. Number 3. The narrator nobody wanted, including himself. The scariest thing on television wasn't a monster. It was the man calmly explaining what you were about to see. When The Twilight Zone was first created, Rod Serling didn't plan on being the narrator.
Antiseptically, rigidly acceptable show. Why, it bore no relationship at all to what we had purported to say initially.
He wanted a big, booming, godlike voice. Someone theatrical, someone legendary. They even asked Orson Welles, one of Serling's personal favorites, the man who once caused a nationwide panic with War of the Worlds. The problem? Welles wanted too much money. Other voice actors sounded too polished, too much like announcers, or too cheesy like a horror movie. As the deadline for the first season got closer, other options didn't work out, and Serling reluctantly offered to try it himself. He didn't see himself as a performer and thought he looked stiff on camera.
And now, Mr. Serling.
This may look to you like any dismal, dark, and dingy alley that lies skulking off the myriad shadow places off the main drags. Actually, it's the private domain of leprechauns and elves and supplies the locale of next week's Twilight Zone.
He thought his voice sounded too sharp, but there was no one else, so Serling stepped in front of the camera and didn't act at all. He just stood there, sometimes leaning against a set piece, looking straight into the lens, calm and detached, like a tired journalist who already knew how the story would end and felt a little sorry for you. That cool, noir-like presence became part of the show itself. And then there was the cigarette. It wasn't a prop, it was part of him. Serling was a famous chain smoker, and in many of those intros, the cigarette is right there, smoke curling into the frame as he explains that you've just crossed over into another dimension. That rough sandpaper rasp in his voice, that wasn't acting, that was the nicotine. In Season 1, Serling mostly narrated off-screen, but his on-camera role grew as the series went on, and audiences loved it. The man who thought he didn't belong on camera became the face of The Twilight Zone. Number 4. The theme song, wasn't the original. The Twilight Zone didn't always sound like The Twilight Zone. For the first season, Rod Serling went all out. He hired Bernard Herrmann, Alfred Hitchcock's go-to composer and the man behind the screaming violins in Psycho. Yeah, that one. Herrmann's original theme was elegant, orchestral, and unsettling. It felt like a classic Hollywood thriller. It was smart, moody, and sophisticated, but honestly, it was too classy. It didn't stick in your head, it didn't make your skin crawl, and it definitely wasn't something you'd hum on a playground when something strange happened. When Season 2 came around, the producers wanted something stranger, edgier, something that sounded less like a film score and more like pure anxiety. So they turned to French composer Mario Casella. And here's the twist. Casella didn't actually write the Twilight Zone theme as a song. He had recorded a bunch of short experimental music pieces for a library. The producers took 2 of them, It's Range 3 and My Lou 2, and literally stitched them together. 4 eerie guitar notes, a nervous bongo beat. It was experimental, almost alien, unpolished, jagged, and it was perfect. That messy little mashup became one of the most recognizable sounds in television history. Those 4 notes instantly tell your brain that something is very wrong. You don't even need to see the picture. Your mind just fills in the rest. Here's the kicker. Mario Casella, the man behind one of the most famous TV themes ever, didn't even realize what he had created. He lived in France and never watched The Twilight Zone while it was airing. He only found out years later when his royalty checks suddenly got much bigger. The most unsettling sound on television? That was an accident.
Number 5. Before they were legends, they were losing it in black and white. Future movie stars had to earn it by screaming at vending machines, arguing with gremlins, and overacting their hearts out in black and white. The Twilight Zone wasn't about stunt casting, it was a pressure cooker that either broke actors or made them legends. Before he was Captain Kirk, William Shatner gave one of the most parodied performances in TV history in Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. Trapped on an airplane, sweating through his suit, Shatner sees a monster on the wing and completely loses his mind.
And that wasn't even his first breakdown. At one point, he's obsessed with a fortune-telling napkin dispenser. Between the devil-headed machine and the airplane gremlin, Shatner spent the early 60s being psychologically tortured by inanimate objects. Then there's Burt Reynolds, before the mustache, before the swagger.
The guy who plays Jeremy's gonna have to know what it's all about. A mature guy who knows the score. A guy with some zazz, a guy with some moxie. A guy who understands tertiary motivation.
In The Bard, Reynolds plays an actor doing a painfully accurate parody of Marlon Brando's method acting style. The mumbling, the slouching, the t-shirt showing that even then, Burt had that unmistakable wink. Robert Redford played Death in Nothing in the Dark, calm, kind, radiant. The episode flips expectations completely. Redford delivers it so effortlessly that it remains one of the most emotional episodes of the series. And Burgess Meredith appeared in 4 episodes, more than any other lead actor, including Time Enough at Last and The Obsolete Man.
I'm not going to starve to death anyway. Lots of food. Food enough to last for years and years and years and years.
He became Serling's go-to everyman. Thoughtful, fragile, and usually crushed by the universe. And one last twist, while Meredith holds the record for most starring roles, the actual most seen face in The Twilight Zone might belong to Robert McCord, who appeared in dozens of episodes as background characters and extras. He's the show's unofficial Where's Waldo, and once you notice him, you can't stop spotting him. The Twilight Zone didn't just launch careers, it really stress-tested them. Number 6, The 8-Day Miracle. Television production schedules in the early 60s were intense, but The Twilight Zone worked on a whole different level.
Isn't Mr. Schwimmer coming?
Yes, Mr. Schwimmer is coming. He'll be here at 8 o'clock.
Good.
Most prestige dramas took 10 to 12 days just to film a single episode. Rod Serling didn't have that luxury. A typical Twilight Zone episode went from idea to finished broadcast in about 8 days total. Pre-production took 1 or 2 days. Filming lasted 3 to 5 days of brutal 12 to 14-hour shoots. Post-production took a day or 2 of frantic editing, scoring, and Serling's iconic narration, often all happening at the same time. This wasn't a marathon, it was a series of weekly sprints. And because Serling wrote nearly 2/3 of the episodes himself, scripts often arrived just in time. Guest stars would show up on very short notice, sometimes on the day of filming, and were just handed a script full of dense philosophical monologues.
What? What are you looking at? Bob?
No table reads, minimal rehearsal. You just learned your lines in the makeup chair and hoped for the best. Directors didn't have the luxury of perfection either. If an actor stumbled but the moment felt right, they kept it. That's why The Twilight Zone has that raw, almost theatrical energy. It feels like live television, because for everyone involved, it basically was. Meanwhile, the editors were fighting their own battle. Film was physically cut and taped together. If a shot didn't work, they couldn't reshoot, it was gone. They relied on clever cutaways, sound design, and sheer creativity to save scenes during marathon shifts. Here's the wild part. The pace actually helped protect the show's vision. Network executives had little chance to interfere. By the time someone at CBS decided an ending was too dark, the episode was already on its way out. The human cost was real. The pace wrecked Serling's health. He joked about being the oldest young man in Hollywood. When the show ended in 1964, he was only 39, but he looked decades older.
And now, Mr. Serling.
Next on Twilight Zone, an eminent performer of stage and screen, Mr. Richard Bayside, in an oddball excursion that we call Probe 7, Over and Out.
That stripped-down, live feeling, it wasn't always artistic, it was survival. Number 7. The episode that predicted its own star's brush with death. Sometimes The Twilight Zone didn't just tell stories about fate, it lived them. The Purple Testament aired on February 12, 1960. In it, William Reynolds plays a World War II lieutenant who gains a terrifying ability. He can see a strange glow on the faces of men who are about to die.
12 wounded, 4 dead. All in 2.5 hours. 12 wounded, 4 dead.
And eventually, that glow appears on his own face, staring back at him in a mirror. The episode doesn't show his death. You just hear a distant explosion. Your imagination does the rest. Rod Serling knew that what you don't see is always scarier.
People, cars, houses, the works. But something's wrong in the scene. Something very abnormal amidst the normal. You'll see what I mean when next week we bring you Elegy by Charles Beaumont. It stars Cecil Kellaway. Thank you and good night.
Here's where things get strange. On the same day the episode aired, William Reynolds and director Richard Baer boarded a small plane, and it crashed. Both men survived, but the timing was impossible to ignore. An episode about a man who sees his own death broadcast on the very day its star nearly died in real life. Reynolds never talked much about the coincidence publicly. He went on to have a long television career and lived to be 90 years old. But for anyone who believes the universe has a sense of humor, or something darker, the story sticks with you. Serling built The Twilight Zone on moments like this, the ones that blur the line between fiction and reality, the ones that make you wonder if the stories we tell somehow echo back into the world that created them. And sometimes that echo is a little too loud. Number 8. The smoke and mirrors behind the fifth dimension. The Twilight Zone jumped from the Revolutionary War to the year 3000, sometimes in back-to-back weeks. The production didn't have the budget to build everything from scratch, so they didn't. The neighborhood in The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street.
Maple Street, USA. Late summer. A tree-lined little world of front porch gliders, barbecues, the laughter of children, and the bell of an ice cream vendor.
Was filmed on Universal's Courthouse Square backlot, the same set that would later become Hill Valley and Back to the Future. Spacesuits were repurposed U.S. Navy pressure suits or leftover costumes from 1950s B-movies like Destination Moon. Roman tunics came straight from MGM's stock of biblical epics like Ben-Hur. Here's the trick that made it all work. Shooting in high-contrast black and white hid everything. Scuffed sets, painted plywood, and high-tech consoles that were really just wooden boxes with Christmas lights glued on. Cinematographers like George T. Clemens lit those borrowed sets like film noir masterpieces. The result was a $50,000 TV episode that looked like $1 million movie. Then CBS almost ruined it. In 1960, the network decided the show was too expensive, so their solution was videotape, the same technology used for game shows and the evening news. 6 episodes got the treatment, including Night of the Meek, the Art Carney Santa Claus episode.
Ma'am? Now you get up on your throne and see if you can keep from disillusioning a lot of kids that not only isn't there a Santa Claus, but the one in this store happens to be a wino who'd be more at home playing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Now get with it, Santa Claus!
The moment those episodes aired, the spell broke. Film had depth, shadows, and texture. Videotape had none of that. Everything was brightly lit, flat, and harsh. Instead of a nightmare, it looked like a daytime soap. The Twilight Zone didn't feel like the fifth dimension anymore. It felt like local access television. The experiment was so disliked that CBS quietly switched back to film and never tried it again. For years, those videotaped episodes were even left out of syndication because they didn't match the rest of the series. Even as kids flipping channels at 2 a.m., we could feel it. The videotaped episodes didn't feel like reruns, they felt like imposters. Serling proved that you didn't need new worlds, just the right shadows to turn familiar ones into nightmares. Hey, quick pause. If the Twilight Zone was part of your late-night childhood, flipping channels with the lights off and volume low, hit that subscribe button. We do deep dives like this every week. Which episode messed you up the most? The airplane gremlin? The broken glasses? I know those got to me. Let us know. All right, let's get back into the zone. Number 9. The most expensive shot in the Twilight Zone history. The Twilight Zone was never a big-budget show, but one episode pushed the limits of what a half-hour TV drama could attempt. The Odyssey of Flight 33 was pure sci-fi spectacle, a Boeing 707 punching through time, first back to the age of dinosaurs, then forward to 1939 New York City.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Farber. We encountered some momentary difficulty back there, but as you can see, we're over New York City now and should be landing inside of just a few minutes. Thank you.
On paper, it sounded impossible for television, and it almost was. A typical Twilight Zone episode cost about $50,000, covering new sets, new actors, and new everything. There was no standing location or regular cast to rely on. The anthology format meant starting from scratch each time. But Flight 33 needed more. A detailed cockpit set, aerial stock footage, and one shot that would become the most expensive single piece of footage the series ever produced, a stop-motion dinosaur, the Brontosaurus. It wasn't made for the Twilight Zone, it was borrowed from the 1960 B-movie Dinosaurus.
Skipper, verify something for me, would you? And in a hurry? Look!
It's not possible. What in the name of everything holy is going on?
Even so, that brief prehistoric moment cost about $2,500 for a show already running on fumes. That was real money. Producer Buck H. Houghton later recalled that CBS Business Affairs had some hard questions about the cost. For a half-hour television show, that kind of scrutiny was rare and uncomfortable. But here's the thing about the Twilight Zone. Its most beloved episodes weren't the ambitious ones, they were the stripped-down ones. The Midnight Sun used just a single apartment and 2 actresses to show the end of the world. Time Enough at Last was practically a one-man show. These episodes didn't need spectacle, they had ideas. And ideas are what people remember decades later. The shattering glasses, the melting paintings, the empty library steps. That's what sticks, not the dinosaur. Number 10. Why it's called the Twilight Zone. The show's title wasn't just poetic, it had real meaning. Among pilots, the Twilight Zone was an informal phrase, a warning about a truly dangerous condition. During landings at dusk, dawn, or in heavy fog, pilots could lose the horizon completely. Sky and ground blended into the same shade of gray. Without that visual line, the inner ear would lie. Pilots felt like they were climbing when they were actually diving. That moment of uncertainty, when nothing looks wrong but everything is, was what many pilots called the Twilight Zone.
The problem is simply that the plane is going too fast, and there is nothing within the realm of knowledge, or at least logic, to explain it. Unbeknownst to passenger and crew, this aeroplane is heading into an uncharted region, well off the beaten track of commercial travelers.
Rod Serling knew this fear firsthand. Before television, he was a paratrooper in World War II, riding inside transport planes, surrounded by pilots who lived or died by those vague in-between moments. Serling understood something most horror writers missed. Fear doesn't live in total darkness. It lives in dim light, when you think you understand what you're seeing. That idea echoes elsewhere, too. In oceanography, there's a region called the mesopelagic layer, between 200 and 1,000 meters deep. It's a world of permanent twilight, no sunlight strong enough for plants, but not complete darkness either. The creatures that live there have massive eyes, glowing bodies, and shapes that just feel wrong. Sound familiar? It's the same kind of space Serling explored every week, a place where the rules of the surface world stop working and strange things appear in the gloom. Early on, Serling experimented with names like the Zone of Twilight before landing on the one that stuck. The Twilight Zone won because it sounded scientific and poetic, authoritative yet mysterious.
It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
By borrowing a term from aviation, Serling made the supernatural feel like just another branch of physics we hadn't figured out yet, and somewhere along the way, the phrase escaped the show entirely. It became a cultural shorthand. When something made no sense, instead of saying, "That's weird," you hum the four-note theme. Done. Number 11. The art film heist that won an Oscar. One episode aired, and you thought, did I accidentally change the channel, or did TV just get smarter than me? In 1964, The Twilight Zone pulled off one of the boldest moves in television history.
The ingredients: an American destroyer, the Pacific Ocean, and the ghostly sound of hammering from 30 fathoms below. They add up to a strange tale of the bizarre and nightmarish. Mike Kellen and Simon Oakland star in a very different kind of Twilight Zone, which we call the 30-fathom grave.
Instead of producing an original episode, they licensed a French short film. Director Robert Enrico had already made the perfect adaptation of Ambrose Bierce's 1890 story, An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, for a fraction of what it would cost to produce an original episode. CBS acquired the rights, no actors to cast, no sets to build, no locations to scout. It was essentially turnkey television. All they had to do was zonify it, add Rod Serling delivering his iconic opening and closing narrations, and that was it. The rest stayed untouched. When it aired, the difference was impossible to miss. This wasn't shot like a TV episode. It flowed like a dream. The camera moved with a fluid, cinematic grace that made standard television look stiff and artificial in comparison. It felt less like a broadcast and more like a memory you weren't sure was yours. There was almost no dialogue, no speeches, no moral spelled out for you. Instead, you got wind in the trees, footsteps, birds breathing, and silence doing most of the work.
Heavy. Heavy. Heavy.
For viewers used to Serling's eloquent monologues, it felt shockingly experimental. Then came the ending, the revelation that the entire desperate escape happened in the split second before the character's death, which hit like a punch to the chest. Here's the thing, the film had already won the Academy Award for Best Live-Action Short Film before The Twilight Zone ever aired it. Because the licensing was limited, it wasn't widely seen in syndication for years. It became the ultimate ghost episode, folklore that older siblings swore they had seen, but you could never catch for yourself. And there's a final twist worthy of Rod Serling. The only Twilight Zone episode connected to an Academy Award was the one he didn't write. Number 12. The One-Man Dictaphone Factory. Back then, TV used to feel handcrafted, before CGI, before streaming, before algorithm-approved content. That was the Twilight Zone, and most of it came from one guy pacing around his office. Rod Serling wasn't just the host, he was a one-man creative machine. Cigarette in one hand, glass of water in the other, he'd pace back and forth, dictating every line, every pause, every eerie beat into a recorder.
Twilight Zone, we offer you the unbelievable along with an explanation. Three men visit a strange new world with people, cars, houses, the works. But
when you hear those monologues on The Twilight Zone, that's basically Serling talking to himself, living inside his own scripts around the clock. He wasn't completely alone, though. Serling teamed up with Richard Matheson and Charles Beaumont, the show's unofficial Holy Trinity. Matheson brought the nightmares, like Nightmare at 20,000 Feet.
both of Bill's Twilight Zone, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. I think he was just fantastic.
Where did that idea come from?
I was on an airplane and I looked out, it was all these fluffy clouds, and I thought, gee, what if I saw a guy skiing?
And Beaumont brought the twisted humor, like in The Howling Man. Together, the three of them wrote almost 80% of the episodes. A small circle, huge results, and no network committee to water down the weird. But it came at a cost. By season 5, Serling wasn't just tired, he was creatively burned out. He battled censors episode after episode and admitted he was starting to repeat himself. He eventually sold his share back to CBS, convinced the show wouldn't last. And then there's the tragic subplot that feels like it came straight out of the Zone itself. Charles Beaumont fell ill with a mysterious brain disease that aged him prematurely. He looked decades older than he was, and friends had to ghostwrite his final scripts so he could keep getting paid. The show's darkness had seeped into real life. Serling's world was strange and exhausting, but that obsessive quality control gave us stories that still haunt and inspire decades later. Number 13, the ride that brought Serling back from the dead. Disney took something creepy and turned it into a full-body nostalgia trip. That is the Tower of Terror. But the real magic isn't the free-falling elevator, it's how they resurrected Rod Serling himself.
Tonight's story on the Twilight Zone is somewhat unique and calls for a different kind of introduction. This, as you may recognize, is a maintenance service elevator, still in operation, waiting for you.
In the pre-show, you hear Serling's voice introducing the story. But here's the thing, some of it isn't actually him. Disney brought in voice actor Mark Silverman to fill in the gaps. The engineers went full old school, vintage microphone, optical track, hiss, the works, all to make Silverman's lines blend seamlessly with Serling's 1961 recordings. When Serling says, "Tonight's story on the Twilight Zone is somewhat unique," and the next line flows perfectly, you're hearing a digital sleight of hand. And then there's the ghost cigarette. In the original footage, Serling is holding a Chesterfield like it's part of his DNA, but Disney's no smoking policy meant Imagineers had to digitally erase it. Watch closely in the pre-show library. Serling's hand is frozen in a slightly awkward C shape, forever clutching air. It's subtle, weird, and only true fans notice. But Disney didn't just build a ride, they built a shrine. Hidden throughout the attraction are Easter eggs only diehards will catch. The devil-headed mystic seer from Nick of Time, Burgess Meredith's broken glasses from Time Enough at Last, the cookbook from To Serve Man, a lonely trumpet from A Passage for Trumpet, dust you can touch, cobwebs imported from horror films, high-contrast noir lighting. You're not riding an elevator, you're walking into a black and white TV set. Disney didn't build a hotel attraction, they built a Twilight Zone museum that drops you 13 stories.
Number 14, Rod Serling's $1 Million Oops. TV used to be disposable. Back in 1964, nobody thought shows were meant to last. Once an episode aired and maybe got one rerun, it was basically trash. That was the world Rod Serling was living in when the Twilight Zone wrapped after 5 grueling seasons.
I read it and didn't realize it was about me. I'm not depressed. I don't have that massive an ego that I run around preoccupied with myself. I'm particularly sorry you brought it up, Dick, because I've been fascinated by what's been said here this evening.
CBS came knocking with a tempting offer. Sell a 40% stake in the show for a lump sum, about $600,000. To a TV writer in 1964, that was never work again money, and Serling took it. He figured the show would be dated by the time the 70s rolled around. Black and white morality plays would be out, forgotten, nobody would care. Fast forward a few years, and every independent station in America suddenly needed content. Enter the Twilight Zone, the eternal syndication superstar. Paranoia, greed, fear, it turns out those never go out of style. Serling's stories played out over and over, night after night, year after year. Here's the twist. If he had kept that 40% stake, his estate would almost certainly have pulled in hundreds of millions in royalties over the next 6 decades. Instead, Serling spent the rest of his life working, writing, teaching, and hosting Night Gallery.
Not really. They say it's Rod Serling's Night Gallery, and it isn't really Rod Serling's Night Gallery. It's somebody else's. And I only write a few of the scripts, and I front the show.
All because that big payday now cost him a fortune later. A classic Twilight Zone ending, except it happened to the man who invented them.
His wife, Carol, stepped in as the guardian of his legacy, making sure Rod's name stayed synonymous with the show, even if the big checks went to CBS. The man who warned us about ironic twists of fate lived one himself.
Number 15. The infinite spiral that sucked us in. TV endings used to mess with your head. They didn't just fade to black and roll credits. They left you sitting in silence, wondering what the hell just happened. That was the Twilight Zone, and nothing captured that feeling better than the spiral. In Season 4, Rod Serling swapped the usual static credits for a hypnotic, spinning vortex, black and white lines twisting into infinity.
Next on Twilight Zone, a marvelously exciting excursion into a very strange place called Valley of the Shadow.
No beginning, no end. Just an endless loop pulling you deeper into the screen. This wasn't flashy graphics, it was psychological warfare. The spiral didn't say the end. It whispered, the nightmare isn't over. It reset itself every time, inviting viewers to step back into the zone. Not because the story was finished, but because in Serling's world, stories never really finish. They just echo. For kids, watching reruns in dark living rooms, CRT flickering, parents asleep down the hall, that spiral was a dare. Stare at the swirl, let it pull you in, eyes wide, heart racing. Suddenly, your neighbor might not be human. Your teacher might be an alien. The world outside might not be the world you left that morning. That was Serling's genius. He didn't build a place. He didn't create a planet or a secret dimension hidden behind a door. The Twilight Zone was never out there. It was in your head. It always had been. That's why these episodes still feel fresh 60 years later. Human fear, jealousy, greed, and folly never change. They just get recycled from one generation to the next. The monsters wear different faces. The technology updates. But the dread, that's eternal. And living off the end? Pure genius. Most shows wrap up neat and tidy. Lesson learned, problem solved, fade to black. But the Twilight Zone refused to let you off the hook. The moral didn't vanish with the credits. It landed squarely on you. Suddenly, you weren't just watching a story, you were living in the aftermath of one. The verdict? It's always yours. That spiral is still spinning, and somewhere right now, a teenager is discovering this show for the first time. Maybe on a streaming service, maybe on a dusty DVD from their parents' collection. But they're about to watch Time Enough at Last, or The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, and they're going to feel that same chill we felt decades ago. Because the zone doesn't age, it doesn't expire, it just waits. And once you've entered, you never really leave. Welcome to the Twilight Zone. And there you have it, 15 weird facts about the Twilight Zone. Tell us in the comments which one surprised you the most. If this video took you back to late-night reruns and rabbit ear antennas, hit that subscribe button and share this with a friend who still watches the Twilight Zone marathon every New Year's Eve. And until next time,